Hello, welcome Fish here. In this video we're going to just look at some TACVIEW files and we're going to look at the difference in tactics needed to defeat the MiG-29S and the MiG-29As. We're going to start off with the MiG-29A. An important point to note is that the MiG-29A does not carry a jammer by default, so you shouldn't have any difficulty in locking it. Anything from 40 miles out you should have a decent lock. So let's look at what happens if you don't have your ECM on and you encounter in a head-to-head. So we have set it up here at around the 19-mile mark. So we're going to now run the tape, and we can see we have a launch at around the 18-mile mark, and I've gone defensive. And this defensive track from the time I brake to the time I turn back in is approximately 30 seconds, and that works out most times. So I've turned back in, but notice what's happened here is the R-27R missile, while it started off with a decent track, my defensive maneuvers have broken its lock. So you can see it's gone ballistic and I'm turning back in. Now I've got a firing solution for our MiG-29A, and he's launched another one off bore sight, and once again it seems to lose lock at an early stage. So I've hit him with my AM-120. So now look at the same scenario again, except this time I have ECM on. So I have music on, and we can see, if I switch off the track, we can see the launch happens at around 12 miles now, compared to 18. So the 6 miles in the difference here. So he's got to get in 6 miles closer in order to get a valid locked launch on me. So once again, I've taken an evasive maneuver, dropped flares and chaff on the way round, and you can see again the missile has broken lock. So it's not a very effective missile, the R-27R, and it can be evaded by this hard U-turn. It's also important to note that you should be up in speed. Altitude is around Angels 20 and speed should be around Mach 1 during the engagement, so you have enough inertia and momentum to get into that turn and still have a reasonable speed while turning away. He's notched away, and we watch. This missile is not really tracking me. So I've now started to turn back into the fight. Once again, it's around the 30-second mark between here and my starting to turn back in here. And now I've got a solution to take a launch. And at this stage, we're at about 6 miles. So that's a decent firing solution. He's gone cold, and I've got him. Now let's look at putting what we've learned together. And what we're going to do now is, we know that he can't launch until he gets to 12 miles, and we can launch well within the 18-mile mark. So what we're going to do is we're going to lock and launch at around 13 miles, 13 or 14 miles, and then we're going to notch. In the meantime, he's going to launch, but at that stage we've closed the range, and good chance that our AM-120s will have gone active, and so we've got the upper hand. So let's play this out. And we can see the range is closing. I'm going to stop it when we launch. You can see we're at 14 miles. I've taken a launch and notched. He's taken a launch, and now I've had to go defensive. His missile is tracking, but it stopped tracking now, and my missile has made the hit. So let's roll the clock a little bit and see. We have another MiG now in the arena, and pretty much the same thing. Launched, notched, then turned into defensive. and at that range he hasn't much of a chance. So that's a very valid tactic to use for the MiG-29As. So the MiG-29S now we're going to look at, and it's a completely different scenario. The MiG-29S is a much more lethal enemy and must be dealt with in a completely different way. The first thing to note, and we're just going to run this track, we can see at nearly 23 miles, he has the capability to launch his R-77s. Now, if we launched our AIM-120s at that distance, we would definitely not track. So the R-77s are more potent than the AIM-120s, and they can go pitbull at a much earlier phase. So if we were to use jamming, what it would do for us is, if our jammer was on, it would prevent him from launching. And I don't have any track for that, but you can try it yourself. It would mean that before he can launch, he would be down to almost 12 miles. Now, the problem with that is that we're also down to 12 miles, and he's fitted with he's got two distinct advantages. He's the R-77, which are a more potent missile as discussed, but he also has an intrinsic ECM. And the ECM is very effective, and sometimes you may not break through to less than the 12-mile range, at which case he's long got his R-77s off on you. So the tactic that's necessary with the MiG-29Ss is to force him to launch his R-77s early in the fight, be prepared to turn. Now, it's only when the missile goes active that you get a big star or diamond on your RWR. At that stage, it's important to make a brake turn, 180-degree brake turn, and pull away and do some maneuvering to deplete the missile of its energy. Hopefully, during that maneuver, the MiG-29, if you haven't fired a missile, the MiG-29 will have launched its second missile. It will also be in the air, and there should be plenty of time to maneuver. Once you've maneuvered, as soon as you see the diamond on the RWR, you should be able to defeat both of those missiles. So I'm going to play this tactic out. So he's launched. And I've launched. In this case, in this scenario, I've actually had, I've been able to break through his jamming, and I've got a good lock. So at a range of, let's try it here, at a range of about 15 miles, I've been able to launch. So I've launched, the R-77 is locked onto me, and I've started to break. So it's a hard break. And in the meantime, before I even launched, he had a second missile in the air. So a lot of times they do this. He launches both R-77s at the same time. Now at this angle, both of these missiles will look in a fairly similar position on the RWR. You should be able to distinguish them. And if you go into a harder turn, the angle between the two is wider, so you'll be able to see both of them on the RWR. It's important that you're absolutely sure that the MiG has launched its two R-77s before entering the next phase of the fight. So my missile has sent him defensive, and I've now turned back into the fight. I've only got one AIM-120 left, and he's coming hot into the fight once again, and he doesn't have any long-range missiles, only his R-73s. I've got a decent range here, and I've launched at 11 miles. He's gone defensive, but he's also gone slow, and he's gone. Okay, looking at the same scenario again, except this time I don't launch and I go defensive first, and it's a slightly different outcome. But the same principle applies. We keep our ECM off and we allow him to launch early, watching our RWR for when we need to break out of the fight and go defensive. So R-77 in the air. He's notched. He's launched a second R-77. Both of those have got good track on me. They appear in a similar place on the RWR. I've gone defensive. Continue away from the fight. He's now continued to close in. And this is the difference between this one and the last one. He had to go defensive because I shot my 120. And it meant that when I turned back into the fight, I had a reasonable range. In this case now, the range is closing. So if we look at where he is, he's 11 miles from me, and I still have to turn back in. So he's going to come in a few miles more by the time I can turn back in. So it's a different kind of fight now. So I need to make sure it's safe from the R77s before I turn back in. This time I've turned back in, and now there's only 5 miles between us. And he has these R73s. They're short range infrared missiles, not very effective. I still have an AM-120, which I've managed to launch and gone defensive. He's tried to go defensive, but it's too late. Third track is the same. We have 23 miles launch range, or 77 off the rails. Continuing in, I don't notice this. I don't know this R77 is in the air until I start to turn. He's turning back in. Second launch, so it's 2 R77s in the air. This stage, we're quite close. I've got the missile warning on my RWR. I need to make a hard turn. Both of those missiles are tracking me now. Drop some chaff and flares. They've absolutely made no effect, but I've outrun the first missile. And I'm turning back in now. Again, counting roughly the 30 seconds to turn back in. Distance between me and Miggy is 5 miles at this stage. So I have a huge advantage here now because I have 2 M120s, and I could break and leave the fight again and make a large separation if I thought we were getting in too close. Okay, so the final scenario is pretty much the same again. You can see our MiG launches at about 22 miles. Breaks off. Launches a second R77. I've managed to get a break. I've managed to break through his jamming, and I've got a valid launch at about, let's see the distance, 16 miles. So it's caused him to go defensive, and I've managed to outrun both of those missiles. He's come back in offensive into the fight. Remember, I've got 1 AM-120s, and at this stage, probably this is the mistake I made here. I knew he was depleted of R77s, and he was coming hot on me. I should have waited till about 12 miles to launch. I launched at nearly 16 miles. And note what happens now. He turns defensive, drops chaff and flares, and he's got enough momentum to carry him away. He's braking, outmaneuvering my AMRAAM, and it's out of energy. In the meantime, I've gone offensive on him, and the fight's closed. I managed to get a lock because he's turning. I have a lock on him, and I take a shot. He spoofs my missile, take a second shot too close in, missed him, and now it's into a guns fight. He's gone slow, and I do manage to get a shot on him eventually. So I hope you found this interesting. I suppose the points to take away are the MiG-29A is completely different animal to the MiG-29S. The tactics with the A are to have your ECM on and to release an AMRAAM at around the 13 or 14 mile mark notch, and then when you get a release of the R27R on your RWR, you go defensive. And at that stage, within that range, you have a good chance that the AMRAAM will have taken down your MiG-29. For the MiG-29S, what you've got to do is, he's got the upper hand to start with, so you've got to ensure that he depletes his R77s before you engage in the fight. And you can do it in two ways. If you've got a breakthrough, if you can break through his home on his jammer at about 14 or 15 miles, you might get a shot off, which forces him to go defensive while you're defensive on his two missiles. The benefit of that is when you turn back in, he's got no R77s and you've got an AMRAAM 120, and so you're in a good position to engage in the fight and close the distance and take him down. In the other scenario, you don't launch any of your AM120s. You keep the two of them and you allow him to deplete his R77s. The disadvantage of this one is that when you turn back into the fight after going defensive, he's going to be very close in. There is a risk that he has a chance to launch his R73, but on the other hand, you have your AM120s, and if you need to break away from the fight, you've got some momentum and speed to do that. So I hope you found this useful, and thanks for watching.